Snow fell so thick it erased the makeshift airstrip. She stepped down from the medical transport in a faded silver doctor's coat, hands trembling from cold, eyes lowered like every other volunteer. No one in the medic unit knew this woman had once been called by a name scrubbed from every military record. When the first volley of gunfire tore through the pine forest and the medical convoy fell into an ambush in the blizzard, every rule of warfare collapsed. And in that instant between life and death, a single shot rang out so precise it changed the fate of the entire unit. The forward base squatted in a valley where winter came early and stayed late. Wind carved the snow into sharp ridges across the compound. Frost clung to every surface. The medical tent sagged under ice. Captain James Rourke stood outside the operations hut, watching the transport truck crawl through the gate. His breath came out in white clouds. 3 weeks ago, they had 12 medics. Now they had 7, 2 killed in a mortar strike. 3 evacuated with frostbite so severe they lost fingers. The replacement staff stepped down from the truck bed. Young faces, scared faces, kids fresh from stateside training who had never worked a field hospital. Then she emerged, Dr. Helen Voss, according to the roster. Civilian volunteer, age 42, trauma surgeon from Boston General. The paperwork said she had requested deployment specifically to this sector, the most dangerous zone along the northern corridor. Rourke studied her as she carried her single duffel across the snow. She moved differently than the others, not rushed, not hesitant, just economical, each step placed with intention. Her coat hung loose on a lean frame, dark hair pulled back tight, no jewelry, no personal items visible. She kept her distance from the other arrivals, not unfriendly but separate. Dr. Voss. Rourke extended his hand. She looked at him for a moment before shaking. Her grip was firm, brief. Her eyes were gray, flat as the winter sky. Captain, welcome to Paradise Valley. Though I should warn you, the name's ironic. Most names are. She glanced past him at the medical tent. Where do you need me? No questions about her quarters. No complaints about the cold. No small talk. Straight to work then. Rourke gestured toward the tent. Chief Medical Officer is Lieutenant Sarah Chen. She'll get you oriented. Helen nodded once and walked away. Rourke watched her go. Something in the way she moved bothered him. Not a bad bother, just off, like a note played in the wrong key. Inside the medical tent, chaos ruled. 17 patients on 12 beds, supplies stacked in corners, the smell of antiseptic mixing with unwashed bodies and fear. Lieutenant Chen looked up from an IV line she was adjusting. Her scrubs were stained. Dark circles ringed her eyes. Your Voss? Thank God. We've got 3 septic wounds, 2 potential amputations, and a kid with shrapnel in his spine we can't evacuate because of the weather. Chen's voice cracked slightly. Tell me you've done combat medicine before. I've done medicine. Helen set down her duffel. Show me what you need. For the next 6 hours, Helen worked without stopping. Her hands were steady, her decisions quick. She spoke little, just crisp instructions that the nurses followed immediately. Corpsman Derek Mills watched her suture a leg wound that had turned necrotic. Her technique was flawless. Fast. Faster than it should be for someone who claimed this was her first deployment. Where'd you train? He asked. Boston. I mean, who taught you to stitch like that? That's not civilian speed. Helen didn't look up. Practice. She tied off the last suture and moved to the next patient. Mills glanced at Chen, who shrugged. What they didn't see was how Helen always positioned herself with a clear line of sight to both entrances. How she marked the locations of every person in the tent without appearing to look. How she unconsciously checked wind direction through the gap in the canvas every few minutes. Small habits, buried deep, surfacing despite years of suppression. By midnight, the tent had quieted. Most patients were sedated or asleep. Chen found Helen standing outside in the snow, staring at the tree line. You should rest. I'm fine. Nobody's fine here. Chen lit a cigarette, offered one. Helen shook her head. Suit yourself. Chen exhaled smoke into the frozen air. You know what you signed up for, right? This sector sees action every 48 to 72 hours. We're short on security. Short on supplies. Short on hope. I know. Then why request this posting specifically? Helen was quiet for a long moment. Snowflakes landed on her shoulders, melting slowly. Someone has to. Chen laughed, bitter. Yeah, someone always has to. Inside the tent, Derek Mills was inventorying their medical supplies when he found something odd. Helen's personal medical kit, the one she'd brought with her, had a false bottom. Not unusual, lots of doctors carried extra supplies in hidden compartments. But the weight was wrong. He lifted it. Too heavy for just bandages and sutures. He almost opened it, then stopped. Some instinct told him not to. He put it back exactly where he found it. The routine established itself quickly. Helen worked the early shift, 14 hours straight, then grabbed 4 hours of sleep in the staff quarters. She never ate in the mess tent, never joined the evening card games, never talked about herself. After 3 days, Sergeant Marcus Webb started paying attention. Webb ran security for the medical unit, what little security they had. 12 soldiers assigned to protect 70 medical staff and 200 patients. Impossible math. He was walking perimeter when he saw Helen outside the tent again, third night in a row. She stood in the same spot, looking at the same section of forest. Not just looking, studying. Webb had seen that stance before. Range instructors, scout snipers, people who read terrain the way others read books. He approached quietly. She didn't turn, but he knew she'd heard him. No one survived in this valley without developing excellent hearing. Something out there? He asked. Always. Specific threat? The tree line's too close. That ridge to the northwest provides direct line of sight to the landing zone. The approach from the south follows a depression that would conceal movement until 200 meters. Webb stared at her. You do security assessments in your free time, Doc? Helen finally looked at him. I do threat assessments everywhere. Force of habit. What kind of doctor develops that habit? The kind who wants to stay alive. She walked back inside. Webb immediately went to Rourke's office. We need to run a deeper background check on Voss. Rourke looked up from his paperwork. Why? Because she moves like infantry, talks like intelligence, and she just gave me a tactical breakdown of our defensive weaknesses that I didn't ask for. She's a volunteer. Her credentials checked out. Check again. Something's not right. Rourke studied Webb's face, then nodded. I'll send a request up the chain. The response came back 48 hours later. Encrypted. Eyes only. Rourke read it 3 times. Dr. Helen Voss. Credentials, legitimate. Service record, none. Prior military affiliation, classified. Security clearance, inactive, sealed. Further inquiry, prohibited per Executive Order 1488B. That was all. Rourke called Webb in and showed him the message. What the hell does that mean? Webb asked. It means someone very high up doesn't want us digging. Or it means she's something they want to pretend never existed. They both looked toward the medical tent where Helen was working her shift. Inside, Helen was demonstrating a field amputation technique to 2 young medics. Her explanation was clinical, precise, but when she showed them how to position the patient, how to secure the limbs, her movements had a practiced efficiency that went beyond medical training. Nurse Patricia Reeves noticed it too. The way Helen counted under her breath, the way she automatically calculated angles and distances, the way she never wasted a single motion. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Helen glanced up. Yes. Were you military? Before? The tent went quiet. Everyone was listening now. Helen's expression didn't change. No. It's just, you move like my brother. He was special forces. I'm a surgeon. I move like someone who spent 20 years in operating rooms. She went back to her demonstration. But Patricia wasn't convinced. Nobody was. That night, Helen didn't sleep. She sat on her cot, staring at the footlocker that held her personal kit. Inside that false bottom was something she'd sworn never to touch again. A rifle, disassembled, wrapped in oilcloth, each piece memorized down to the molecular level. She'd carried it through 12 deployments under a different name, a name that became legend in certain circles, a name that was supposed to be dead. The weapon had saved hundreds of lives, taken dozens, always from distances so extreme that targets never heard the shot that killed them. She had walked away from that life 6 years ago, returned her equipment, accepted the agreement, complete erasure in exchange for complete silence. But when she saw the casualty reports from this sector, saw how many medics were dying because there was no one to provide overwatch, no one to eliminate threats before they could massacre the unarmed, she made a decision, volunteered under her real name, her civilian credentials, requested the most dangerous posting available, brought the rifle, just in case. Snow began to fall outside, heavy, wet flakes that would reduce visibility to nothing by morning. Helen lay down but kept her eyes open, watching the tent ceiling. Somewhere in the darkness, wind moved through the pines. The sound was like breathing. The call came at 0400. Forward Outpost Gamma had been hit, mortar fire and small arms, 18 casualties, 9 critical. They needed immediate evacuation and medical support. Lieutenant Chen scrambled the medic team. 2 ambulances, 15 personnel including doctors, nurses, and corpsmen. Captain Rourke assigned 6 security troops as escort. Helen was assigned to the lead vehicle. In the operations hut, Rourke spread a map across the table. The route to Gamma followed a logging road through dense forest, then climbed a series of switchbacks into the hills. "Weather's degrading fast," Rourke said. "You'll have maybe a 4-hour window before the next storm system hits." Chen nodded. "We can work with that." Helen stepped closer to the map. She studied the terrain, the contour lines, the marked positions. "This route is exposed," she said quietly. Everyone looked at her. "The road follows this valley for 3 kilometers. Tree cover on both sides, elevation advantage. Anyone watching that stretch could hit the convoy without being seen." Webb, who was leading the security element, frowned. "You suggesting an alternate route? The southern approach adds an hour but keeps you below the ridgeline. Less exposure." "We don't have an hour to spare," Chen said. "Those men are dying. They'll die faster if we drive into an ambush." Rourke studied Helen's face. "What makes you think there's a threat?" "Because if I wanted to hit a medical convoy, that's where I'd do it." The room went silent. "I'd position teams here and here." Helen pointed to 2 spots on the map, overlapping fields of fire. "Wait until the vehicles were committed to the valley. Hit the lead and rear vehicles first to trap the convoy. Then eliminate personnel at will." She described it with such casual precision that everyone in the room felt their skin crawl. "You think like them," Webb said. "I think like someone who wants to survive." Rourke made the decision. "We don't have time for the southern route. Proceed with the primary approach, but stay alert. Voss, you'll ride with Security Team 1. Helen nodded. 30 minutes later, the convoy rolled out. Snow fell steadily now. The world turned white and gray. Visibility dropped to 50 meters. The ambulances crawled along the frozen logging road, wheels fighting for traction. Helen sat in the back of the lead security truck, watching the tree line through the small window. The forest pressed in from both sides, thick stands of pine, deep shadows. Derek Mills sat across from her, clutching his medical bag. "You really think we'll get hit?" he asked. "I think we should be ready if we do." "You always this optimistic?" Helen didn't smile. "Optimism gets people killed." The convoy climbed into the hills. The road narrowed. On their left, the ground dropped away into a ravine. On their right, the forest climbed steeply toward a ridge. Perfect kill zone. Helen's breathing changed. Slower. Controlled. Her eyes tracked movement patterns in the snow. How the wind disturbed the branches. Where drifts had formed and where they hadn't. Small inconsistencies. Signs of recent passage. She leaned forward and spoke quietly to Webb, who was in the front passenger seat. "Stop the convoy." "What?" "Stop. Now." Webb started to argue, then saw her expression. He grabbed the radio. "All vehicles halt. Hold position." The convoy stopped. Helen opened the door and stepped out into the snow. She walked forward 10 paces, knelt down, and brushed snow from the road surface. Fresh tire tracks, recently covered. Not military vehicles, something smaller, civilian trucks that shouldn't be this deep in the operational zone. She stood and looked up at the ridge, took 3 slow breaths, let her vision adjust to the falling snow, looking for shapes that didn't belong. There, a slight discoloration in the snow pattern, where someone had laid in position and the body heat had melted the surface differently. Helen walked back to the security truck. "We need to turn around." "What did you see?" Rourke asked over the radio. "Ambush positions, recently occupied. They're waiting for us." "You're certain?" Helen looked at the ridge again, at the perfect enfilade along this stretch of road, at the way the approaches were covered, at the evidence of professional preparation. Chen's voice crackled through the radio. "We have 18 men dying. We can't just turn back. If we proceed, we'll have 33 people dying," Helen said. "They'll hit us in the valley. We'll be trapped with wounded and no cover. It's a massacre waiting to happen." Rourke was silent for a long moment. "Security team, advance on foot. Scout the valley. Voss, you stay with the vehicles." Helen started to protest, then stopped. She couldn't reveal how she knew, couldn't explain the years of reading terrain, of thinking like a hunter. Webb and 5 soldiers moved forward into the snow. They spread out, weapons ready, advancing in tactical formation. Helen watched them go, counted their steps, calculated angles. They made it 200 meters before the shooting started. The first burst of automatic fire came from the right ridge. Bullets stitched across the snow where Webb's team had been walking. They dove for cover behind rocks and fallen trees. Then the left side opened up. Crossfire. The security truck's windshield exploded. The driver slumped forward. Helen dragged Derek Mills out of the vehicle as rounds punched through the thin metal. More fire from ahead. The ambush team had set up in a U-shape, exactly as Helen had predicted. The medical vehicles were completely exposed. "Fall back!" Rourke screamed into the radio. "All units fall back!" But there was nowhere to go. The road was too narrow to turn around. Backing up meant driving blind through a blizzard with enemy fire raking the entire convoy. Chen jumped from the ambulance and tried to reach the wounded security troops. A burst of fire sent her diving behind a tire. She looked back at Helen with terrified eyes. "What do we do?" Helen was already moving. She grabbed 3 corpsmen. "Get the wounded into the ravine. There's dead ground, 30 meters down. Move now." They hesitated. "Move!" The authority in her voice cut through their panic. They started dragging casualties toward the ravine. Helen turned to Derek. "How many medical personnel?" 15. "Get them all into cover. Make them small. Make them quiet." "What about you?" She didn't answer. She was already running toward the rear ambulance. Bullets kicked up snow around her feet. A round passed so close to her head she felt the air displacement. She didn't flinch, didn't slow. She reached the ambulance and yanked open the back doors, grabbed her personal medical kit, the one with the false bottom. Rourke saw her. "Voss, get to cover." She ignored him. The enemy fire was systematic, disciplined. They weren't trying to kill everyone immediately. They were pinning down the convoy, probably waiting for more forces to arrive. This was a coordinated operation, well planned, well executed. Helen counted muzzle flashes, estimated positions. The ridge teams were 300 meters out, the forward team closer, maybe 200. Standard doctrine would be to lay down suppressing fire and retreat. But they didn't have enough security troops for suppression, and retreat wasn't possible. She looked at the wounded medics huddled in the ravine, at Chen pressed against the truck tire, at Webb and his team trapped in the open, calculated the angles, made a decision. She turned to Rourke. "I need you to trust me." "What?" "Keep everyone in cover. Don't return fire. Don't move. Give me 10 minutes. 10 minutes to what?" Helen met his eyes. To even the odds. Then she was gone, disappearing into the snow before he could stop her. Helen moved through the blizzard like smoke. The enemy had established a solid perimeter, but they were focused on the road, on the trapped convoy. They weren't watching their flanks. Mistake. She circled wide, using the terrain. Stayed low in the dead ground where ravines cut through the forest. Moved during the heaviest snow bursts, when visibility dropped to nothing. Her breathing was controlled, mechanical. The cold didn't touch her. The fear didn't reach her. This was the old training. The muscle memory she'd tried to bury, rising up now like it had never left. She reached a position 200 meters behind the right ridge team, set her medical kit down in the snow, opened the false bottom. The rifle came out in pieces, barrel, stock, scope. Each component slid together with the precision of a Swiss watch, 30 seconds from bag to assembled weapon. She checked the action, loaded 5 rounds, settled into a prone position behind a fallen log. Through the scope, the world crystallized into brutal clarity. 3 shooters on the right ridge, 2 on the left, 4 more forward, professional spacing, good discipline. The wind was gusting from the northwest at approximately 15 miles per hour. Snow falling at moderate density. Temperature well below freezing, which meant air density calculations shifted slightly. Helen had done these calculations 10,000 times, in deserts, jungles, mountains, cities. Her breathing slowed to 4 breaths per minute. In the valley below, Webb's team was still pinned down. One soldier wasn't moving. Blood stained the snow around him. Chen and the medics huddled in the ravine, terrified, unable to help. The enemy was tightening the noose, moving forward in coordinated bounds. Helen watched their command structure through the scope, identified the squad leader by his position and hand signals. Mid-30s, experienced, directing fire with calm precision. He was the center of gravity. Remove him, the others would hesitate. She calculated the shot. Range, 360 meters. Elevation, 40 meters above target. Wind deflection, 8 inches right. Temperature compensation, minimal. Target movement, stationary but alert. Difficulty rating, moderate to high in these conditions. For a civilian, impossible. For the person Helen used to be, routine. She exhaled half a breath and let her finger rest on the trigger, but didn't fire. Not yet. Timing mattered. One shot would reveal her position. She'd have maybe 30 seconds before return fire forced her to displace. That meant she needed to make those 30 seconds count for maximum impact. She studied the enemy formation, looked for the pattern in their movements, the rhythm of their fire and maneuver, found it. They were rotating shooters every 90 seconds. One team provided cover, while another advanced. Textbook small unit tactics, which meant there would be a 5-second window where most of them would be stationary, focused on their sectors, waiting for the movement signal. Helen counted the intervals, timed the pattern, waited. Snowflakes landed on the rifle barrel, melted from the residual heat. In the valley, the enemy squad leader raised his hand to signal the next bound. Helen's finger tightened on the trigger. She stopped thinking, became the shot. The medics huddled in the ravine heard the firefight continue above them. Sporadic bursts. The enemy was conserving ammunition, taking their time. Derek Mills did a head count. 14 medical personnel. They were all there except, where's Voss? Chen looked around. She was just here. I saw her run toward the back ambulance, Patricia said. Then she was gone. Gone where? No one had an answer. Webb's voice crackled over the radio, strained. We're pinned down hard. Need immediate support or we're getting overrun. Rourke was trapped with the convoy, useless. Air support is grounded. Weather's too thick. Reinforcements are 40 minutes out, minimum. We don't have 40 minutes. The transmission cut off as another burst of fire forced him off the radio. Chen pressed her back against the cold rock of the ravine. This was how it ended. Trapped in a frozen valley. Slaughtered because they'd tried to save lives. She thought about Helen's last words. 10 minutes. Even the odds. What could one unarmed doctor do in 10 minutes? On the hillside above them, hidden in snow and shadow, Helen assembled the final piece of her rifle. The scope locked into place with a soft click. She wiped snow from the lens and settled into her firing position. The old, familiar stance. Legs spread for stability, left elbow planted, right hand finding the stock like coming home. Through the scope, she acquired the first target. The enemy squad leader stood on a rock outcropping, coordinating his teams. Confident, exposed. Helen's crosshairs settled on his chest. Wind gusted. She compensated. Snow swirled. She waited for a break in the weather. The squad leader lowered his radio and turned to scan his perimeter. The snow cleared for 3 seconds. Helen fired. The rifle's report was swallowed by the blizzard and the sounds of ongoing battle. A sharp crack that could have been a branch breaking under snow weight. But 360 meters away, the enemy squad leader jerked backward off his rock. His radio tumbled into the snow. He was dead before he hit the ground. The other enemy fighters froze, confused. Their leader had just dropped without warning. Helen was already cycling the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, chambering the next round. She shifted targets. The second shooter was moving toward the fallen leader. Cautious but exposed. Helen's crosshairs found him stepping over a log. She fired again. He collapsed mid-stride. Now the enemy knew they were under fire from a precision weapon. They dove for cover, scanning for the shooter's position. But Helen had chosen her hide well. Deep in dead ground, concealed by fallen timber, the angle was wrong for them to spot her muzzle flash. She acquired the third target. A machine gunner on the left ridge who'd been pouring fire into Webb's position. He was hunkered behind a boulder, trying to make himself small. Not small enough. Helen calculated the angle. The boulder provided cover from the valley, but not from her elevated rear position. She could see 6 inches of his shoulder and part of his head. The wind gusted hard. She waited. It calmed for a moment. She fired. The machine gun went silent. Panic rippled through the enemy formation. 3 men down in 30 seconds, from a direction they hadn't covered, by a shooter they couldn't see. The remaining fighters began pulling back, firing blind into the forest, desperate to suppress a threat they couldn't locate. Helen ejected the third casing. 2 rounds left. She scanned for the next target, found a team leader trying to organize a retreat. He was moving quickly through the trees, using good cover discipline, but he had to cross a small clearing. Just 3 meters of open ground. Helen tracked his movement, predicted his path. He burst from the trees, running hard. She led him by 2 feet. Fired. He went down in the snow and didn't get up. 1 round remaining. The enemy was in full retreat now. 4 dead in under a minute. They abandoned their wounded, abandoned their equipment, just ran. But 1 shooter stayed behind. Older, more experienced. He'd identified roughly where Helen was firing from and started working toward her position, using the terrain skillfully. Through the scope, Helen watched him advance. 50 meters, 40, 30. He was good, very good, moving in short bursts, never exposing himself for more than a second. She couldn't get a clean shot. 20 meters. He raised his rifle toward her position. Helen had a choice. Take a difficult shot through partial cover and probably miss, or displace and let him escape to report her position. Neither was good. Then a third option appeared. Webb's team, freed from the suppressing fire, had moved up the hill. They spotted the remaining enemy fighter from his flank. "Contact right," Webb shouted. The enemy shooter spun toward the new threat, exposed his center mass for 2 seconds. Helen fired her last round. The shooter dropped. Silence fell across the valley. Just wind, just snow, just the ragged breathing of people who'd survived something impossible. Webb reached the ridgeline, weapon raised, expecting more targets. But the enemy was gone. Just bodies in the snow, 5 dead. The rest fled into the forest. "What the hell just happened?" one of his soldiers asked. Webb knelt beside the nearest body. Clean shot through the upper chest. He looked at the angle of entry, traced it back toward the hillside. Someone was shooting from up there, long range, took them apart. Webb didn't answer. He was staring at the distance involved, the conditions, the precision required to make those shots in a blizzard. This wasn't military standard. This was specialist level, elite. In the valley, Rourke emerged from cover. Chen and the medics climbed back to the road. Everyone moved in, shocked silence. Derek Mills did another head count. Still missing one. "Where's Dr. Voss?" They searched the immediate area, called her name, checked the ambulances. Nothing. Patricia noticed tracks in the snow, boot prints leading away from the rear vehicle, circling into the forest. She went up the hill. Chen grabbed a radio. "Helen, if you can hear this, respond." Static. "Helen, we're secure. Come back to the convoy." Still nothing. Webb and 2 soldiers followed the tracks up the slope. The trail led through dense forest, weaving between trees, using terrain like someone with tactical training. They found her firing position behind the fallen log. Disturbed snow where someone had lain prone, 5 spent rifle casings, brass still warm to the touch. Webb picked one up, turned it over in his hand. 7.62 NATO. Match grade. The kind of ammunition used by military precision shooters. "Oh my God," one of the soldiers whispered. The tracks led away from the position. They followed them for another 100 meters until they lost the trail in heavy snow cover. Helen was gone. Webb keyed his radio. "Captain, you need to see this." 15 minutes later, Rourke stood at the firing position. He looked at the casings, looked at the distances to the dead enemy fighters, did the math in his head. "This is impossible." "Someone did it," Webb said. "In a blizzard. Moving targets. 300 plus meters. 5 for 5 hits." Chen arrived, breathing hard from the climb. She saw the evidence and her face went pale. "Helen did this?" "Helen or someone using her credentials," Rourke said. "But she's a doctor. Doctors don't shoot like this." Patricia found something else. A piece of fabric caught on a branch. Silver material from a medical coat. She was here. They all stood in the snow, trying to reconcile what they knew about the quiet civilian volunteer with what the evidence was telling them. Derek spoke what everyone was thinking. Who is she really? Rourke pulled out his sat phone, dialed the encrypted number he'd used for the background check. The call was answered immediately. "This is Captain James Rourke. Forward Base Paradise Valley. I need to speak with someone about Dr. Helen Voss. Right now. This is a priority situation." A long pause. Then a different voice came on the line. Older. Authority in every syllable. "Captain Rourke. I'm Colonel Richard Brennan, Special Operations Command. What's happened?" Rourke explained. "The ambush, the precision shooting, the evidence." Another long pause. "How many enemy casualties?" 5 confirmed dead. Clean shots. 100% hit rate in extreme conditions. Christ. Brennan sounded tired. "Listen carefully, Captain. You're to cease all investigation immediately. Recover the brass and any other evidence. Submit your after-action report with no mention of the shooting. Attribute enemy casualties to your security team. Sir, my people deserve to know. Your people are alive because of her. That's all you need to know. The person you know as Dr. Helen Voss does not exist in any military database. She was never deployed. She was never a shooter. This conversation never happened. Are we clear?" "No, sir. We're not clear. I have medics asking questions." Then you tell them that sometimes in combat, lucky shots happen. You tell them the enemy withdrew when they took casualties from your security team. You tell them whatever you need to tell them except the truth. Because the truth is classified at a level that would end your career if you spoke it out loud. Rourke felt ice in his stomach. What is she? Someone who saved your people. That's all you're authorized to know. The line went dead. Rourke stood in the snow, phone in hand, surrounded by his medics. Chen looked at him. What did they say? He thought about lying, following orders, maintaining operational security. Then he looked at the spent brass in Webb's hand, at the evidence of someone who'd put themselves at enormous personal risk to save lives. They said we owe her everything, and we're never going to know who she really is. The convoy eventually made it to Forward Outpost Gamma. They stabilized the casualties, saved 12 of the 18 wounded. The mission was technically a success, but nobody talked about the ambush. Not officially. Rourke's report mentioned enemy contact, security team engagement, enemy withdrawal, all true, just incomplete. The 5 bodies were recovered by a special operations unit that appeared within hours. No insignia, no identification. They swept the kill zone, collected intelligence, and disappeared before Rourke could ask questions. The brass casings vanished from the evidence locker. The whole thing became a ghost story. Back at Paradise Valley, the medical team tried to return to normal operations, but everything had changed. Derek couldn't look at Helen's empty bunk without seeing those shots, the impossibility of them, the precision that saved their lives. Chen requested Helen's complete file through official channels. The request was denied. No explanation provided. Patricia tried searching military databases for any record of a female precision shooter matching Helen's description. Found nothing. Webb went further. He had friends in special operations. People who knew people. He made quiet inquiries. 3 days later, he got a response. A single encrypted message. Stop looking. For your own good. But Webb couldn't stop. The professional in him needed to understand. Needed to know what kind of training produced shooting like that. He dug deeper. Called in favors. Pushed boundaries. On the 7th day, 2 men in civilian clothes arrived at Paradise Valley. They weren't military, but they had authority. The kind that didn't need uniforms. They met with Webb in a secure room. Sergeant Webb, you've been making inquiries about Dr. Helen Voss. Stop. I need to know. You need to forget. The older one leaned forward. Do you understand what compartmentalized operations means? Then you understand that some people operate outside normal chains of command, outside normal records. They do things that need to be done but can't be acknowledged. She's one of those people. Was. Past tense. She retired 6 years ago with full honors and a binding non-disclosure agreement. She's lived quietly as a civilian since then. No contact with her former life. No exceptions. Until she deployed here. That was her choice. Unauthorized. But we didn't stop her, because we knew this sector needed someone like her. Webb felt something cold settle in his chest. How many operations? That's classified. Ballpark. The man studied Webb's face. Seemed to make a calculation. 12 deployments over 8 years. 273 confirmed. 0 misses. She was the best we've ever produced. And when she walked away, we honored the agreement because she'd earned it. What was her call sign? You don't need to know that. Please. The man stood. This conversation is over, Sergeant. You're to cease all inquiries. Destroy any notes you've made. Never speak of this again. If you comply, your career continues normally. If you don't, you'll spend the next 10 years filing paperwork in Alaska. Do we have an understanding? Webb nodded slowly. The men left. That night, Webb sat in his quarters, trying to process it all. 273 confirmed. In 8 years. The numbers were staggering. Inhuman. Except she wasn't inhuman. She was a woman who'd walked away from that life. Who'd tried to heal instead of kill. Who'd come back one more time when she saw people dying who didn't need to die. He pulled out a small notebook where he'd written everything he'd learned. Every detail. Every theory. Looked at it for a long time. Then burned it. 3 weeks after the ambush, a package arrived at Paradise Valley. No return address, no sender information, just a box marked for Captain Rourke. Inside was a silver medical coat, cleaned, folded, with a single bullet hole through the left shoulder that Rourke hadn't noticed during the chaos. She'd been hit, had continued operating, had made 5 perfect shots while bleeding. There was also a note, handwritten, "Thank you for letting me help. Take care of them. H." That was all. Rourke showed the coat to Chen. "She's not coming back," Chen said quietly. "Do we tell them? The others?" Rourke thought about it. About the questions it would raise. The investigations it might trigger. The potential harm to a woman who'd sacrificed more than they could imagine. We tell them that Dr. Helen Voss completed her volunteer service and returned stateside. We tell them she was an excellent physician who saved lives. We tell them the truth about who she was to us. And the rest? The rest stays classified. But secrets have a way of spreading, even when everyone tries to contain them. The story moved through the medical corps in whispers. The volunteer doctor who could shoot, the ambush that turned, the enemy that fled from a ghost. Details got exaggerated. Facts blurred into legend. Some versions said she'd been Delta Force. Others claimed CIA. A few insisted she'd never existed at all. The truth remained locked away in compartmented files that required clearances most people would never have. But in the medical tents along the northern corridor, where volunteers worked impossible hours under constant threat, a new tradition started. When someone asked why they'd chosen such a dangerous posting, they'd say, "Someone has to." Helen's words, passed down like a prayer. Derek Mills transferred to another unit 6 months later. Before he left, he visited the spot where the ambush had happened. The snow had melted. Spring was coming to the valley. He stood where Helen's firing position had been and looked down at the road. The distance seemed impossible, the angle absurd, but it had happened. He left a small stone on the fallen log, a marker. Over the years, others added stones. Veterans who knew the story, medics who'd heard the whispers. Eventually there was a small cairn, unofficial memorial to someone who couldn't be officially remembered. One final detail emerged years later, when Webb was long retired and the operational restrictions had expired. He was having drinks with a former special operations officer who'd served in the northern corridor. "You ever hear about the ghost of Paradise Valley?" Webb asked. The officer smiled. "Everyone's heard those stories. What if I told you she was real?" "I'd say you probably met her." "Not many people did." "What was her call sign?" The officer was quiet for a moment. Then, "Nightingale." Webb laughed. Bitter. "Perfect. Like the nurse." That's why they chose it. Because she didn't just kill, she saved. Every shot she took was to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. Medics, civilians, aid workers. She was the guardian angel nobody knew they had. Where is she now? No idea. The agreement was complete separation. She could be anywhere. Anyone. Living the quiet life she earned. Webb hoped that was true. Hoped she'd found peace. Somewhere in a small city on the eastern seaboard, a woman walked through fresh snow to her job at a community clinic. She was in her late 40s now, gray starting to show in her dark hair, lines around her eyes from years of close work. Dr. Helen Voss, according to her medical license. Family practice. She treated immigrants, refugees, people who fell through the cracks of the healthcare system. She worked long hours, went home to an apartment with few possessions, lived simply. Sometimes patients asked about her past. She'd smile and say she'd done some traveling, some volunteer work. Nothing interesting. They believed her because she seemed so ordinary, so unremarkable. They didn't notice how she always positioned herself with clear sightlines to the exits, how she unconsciously tracked everyone in the waiting room, how she could assess threats in microseconds. Old habits, buried but never fully dead. On quiet nights, when snow fell like it had in that valley, she'd stand by her window and remember the weight of the rifle, the stillness before the shot, the moment when everything compressed into a single point of absolute focus. She didn't miss it, but she didn't regret it either. Those shots had saved 33 lives. Let medics return home to their families. Let young soldiers grow old. That was worth carrying the memories. Worth being someone she could never speak about. Worth the isolation of a secret that would die with her. She made tea and sat in the darkness, watching snow accumulate on the windowsill. Tomorrow she'd see 20 patients, treat infections, manage chronic conditions, deliver babies. Ordinary work. Sacred work. The work of healing. But tonight, for just a moment, she let herself remember being someone else. Nightingale. The guardian in the storm. The precision that saved lives from impossible distances. A single shot when it mattered most. She finished her tea and went to bed. Snow continued to fall outside, and somewhere in the world, someone who didn't know her name was alive because of her. That was enough. Some warriors don't need medals, don't need recognition, don't need their names in history books. They need only the knowledge that when darkness came, they stood between it and the innocent, one shot at a time, with precision that saved the world, piece by piece. And when their war was over, they walked away, became healers, became ghosts, became legends whispered in medical tents when snow fell heavy and the enemy was close. Dr. Helen Voss. Nightingale. The doctor who wouldn't bow. The shot that changed everything. The guardian no one knew they had. Her story ended where it began,